Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Bloom webinar. I'm Alexander, the founder of Bloom, and for those who don't know us, we supply vetted charity freelancers for interim, part-time, or project work. So do give us a go the next time you're looking for extra support, and if that time is now, then you can book a time to chat with me via the email you'll receive after this session. Bit of admin, please keep yourselves on mute throughout the webinar. If you have any questions or comments, then write them in the chat box, and with any luck, we'll have time to deal with them either during or at the end of Alex's talk. This is being recorded, so don't write anything you wouldn't feel comfortable sharing with a wider audience. Onto the substance, we're very lucky to have Alex with us today. A self-confessed lifetime tech geek, digital and IT innovation has been a consistent strand in his work as a CEO and director at several charities, as well as in his consultancy and training, not least with the AI fundraising training he has done with us at Bloom. He's been using AI in his work for a while now, as well as training others to do it. And I'm really looking forward to him sharing his views on how we can all get AI into perspective. On which note, I have a favour to ask. At Bloom, we too are trying to work out how to respond proportionately to AI. So while you're watching Alex, can you think about what support we could provide that would help you? Is there a particular bit of training you'd be interested in? Are there particular skills you would like access to? Some research we could undertake? Feel free to leave comments in the chat box on that too, or email me directly. Anyway, thank you. And now over to Alex.
Thanks, Alexander. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Friday morning. I'm going on holiday for 2 weeks tomorrow. I've managed to get my holiday cold, so if I start sniffling and coughing, then please forgive me. So thanks for the introduction, Alexander. And I think one thing to say is that I am a tech geek, and I have always been interested in technology, but it's not my main thing. I'm far more interested in what these things do and how they relate to my day-to-day work as someone who works in the charity sector, really. And what I do like is toys. And so, in some ways, AI has been the most fantastic toy for me to experiment with. And that's why I've really enjoyed using it. The other thing to say is that my partner is an AI specialist and machine learning proper geek. So, his day to day is all that kind of stuff. So there've been some interesting conversations over the breakfast table. He knows far more about charities than he wants to, but I get to learn all sorts of things about AI as we go. So I'll give you a perspective. Now, what I'm assuming here is that most people are from fairly small charities and that you're at a fairly early stage in your use if you're using it at all. But I'm also going to talk about some sort of stretch possibilities as well. And the goal really today is just to remove some of the hype and get you to feel a little bit more interested and excited, but also a bit cautious because I want to get across that actually, first slide here, um, there's an awful lot of hype happening. And at the moment, if you want to sell someone a pen, you just tell them it's AI powered. So I want to make sure that people are, on the one hand, aware of the possibilities, but also don't get sucked into this idea that it's going to completely change everything, at least not now. Um, you may well find that robot overlords have taken over by next year, but we can't really predict that just yet. So, what this is about, first of all, AI can help you, but not everything you hear is entirely true, and some of it's a bit massaged. The second thing to say is that you don't need £6 million to commission a new system like one big charity just has, or a real sort of data scientist. There's lots of things that you can do sort of just around the edges, just to sort of wet your feet at the beginning. But you can certainly do really complex things if you want to. And I'm going to look at some at three levels. I'm going to look at some of the basics. I'm going to look at some next steps where you could maybe stretch a little bit in the intermediate, and then look just a little bit at some advanced and optional stuff. But again, I'm not going to go into detail about how big it can get, because I think sometimes we need a bit of realism and also just a little bit of, let's walk before we can run. And so my goal really is to make sure that you approach it with curiosity and confidence, but not panic, which some people have talked to me about, and also not just FOMO, right? This feeling of this could change everything. What am I doing? Am I missing out? There's all sorts of incremental gains at the beginning, but it's not necessarily something that you need to panic about, I think. So where is AI at the moment? Okay, so you may have heard of something called the Gartner hype cycle, or maybe you haven't. But what tends to happen with new technologies is we develop a new innovation, and we have very high expectations. And then what happens is we all start getting super, super excited. And then these expectations go absolutely massive. And we say, for example, that it's going to change the world or no one's ever going to have a job again and all these kind of things. But then what happens is people say, oh, actually, it's not doing anywhere near as much as we thought it would. And you go into the trough of disillusionment and everyone says it's just absolute rubbish. And then there's a process, what they call the slope of enlightenment, where you start to say, okay, well, actually, what's a realistic thing we can expect from this? And at that stage, you reach what they call the plateau of productivity, where people have sort of embedded the tool, started to use it, and everyone's realistic. But you'll hear loads of people talking at the moment about AI bubbles about to burst and so on. People are willing it to happen because it's a good press story. I don't know what to say about those things except that we'll just have to see. But the tools themselves aren't going to go anywhere. Now, the other thing to say is that how much difference it's making in most organizations, not specialists, but in general organizations, is the jury's still out, really. So, for example, MIT did a report where it showed that most of the pilots of AI that companies are using are actually failing. And what's happening is they're not really adopting it. It's mostly being adopted by individuals in the organization rather than looking at it as a whole and as a practice across the organization. So, we'll talk a bit about that. And then the other thing that's happening is people are using AI to generate a lot of material. But what's happening is they're not checking it and they're creating stuff where actually it's easier for them to create it, but it puts more effort onto the person who's reading it. So you've probably got a load of AI junk at a certain point. You've thought, oh my goodness, look at this rubbish that someone's created with ChatGPT and put no thought into. They've moved the effort onto you instead of from them. So in actual fact, what might happen is that the balance of effort overall isn't really changing very much. It's just that they're putting it more on the reader than the writer. At the same time, even in charities, a lot of people have integrated it into their workflows. I use it a lot in my work. People are using it, especially, for example, in a lot of bid writing and so on. It's been really quickly adopted around that. So we'll look at three levels of use. The first is the basics. I'll talk about some of the small wins that you can either start doing now or maybe you're already doing. We'll look at some of the intermediate stuff. We'll think about some more advanced things where it gets a bit more specialist and experimental. But really the goal is wherever you are now to think about whether you want to go a little bit further or not. So in terms of the basics, you may already have or use, and if you don't, maybe someone else in your organization is, probably they are. They'll be using Microsoft Copilot. Microsoft really don't want you to get away without using Microsoft Copilot, so you're probably using that. People will be using ChatGPT. They'll be using Claude, which is a less used tool, but really good. Perplexity, Google AI, and so on. And most of these are just off the shelf tools that you can buy direct to consumer. They're off the shelf, they're low cost or free. The paid versions are usually quite a bit better, and the cost isn't massive. So you're looking at maybe 20 quid a month for most of them, per user. And they can make a big difference there in terms of the jump up. So that's the first possible intermediate step. And the kind of things people are using it for, again, I'm sure you'll be aware of. People are using it for drafting, editing, and summarizing writing. They're using it to do, for example, plain English rewrites of documents where things are particularly complicated. There's something I use, for example, I work with a law center client, and when I don't understand some of the complex legal stuff that I've got to look at, I'm not giving legal advice, by the way, I'd be clear. I'm actually using that to explain some of the legal terminologies to me and so on. People are using it to write really boring and soulless social media posts, which I'm sure you've seen. People can use it for research summaries, writing job descriptions, policies, a lot of fundraising. And then at the other end, there's some really interesting stuff around auto translation. And for example, if you've got people who are using English as a second language, often people are using it to tidy up their writing and so on if their English isn't as good as they'd like. So lots of positives there as well. Now, the thing is, people might be doing this stuff, but are they doing it well? And that's the first thing with the basics, right? So the thing is, it's always got to be human checked. Whatever people say, AI is still producing loads of errors and loads of fake stuff, lots of factual inaccuracies. It's way better than it was, but you still need to really check everything that's being produced. The other thing is that people haven't really done any training in their organizations in general. Again, some have, and it's great, but others haven't. And I would think that, with a lot of the sort of tools that we use in terms of software, we don't expect people just to start using things without any training. But with AI, it sort of snuck up on us, and we've let that happen. The other thing is that a lot of people don't have a policy on AI. And then because of that, there's no trustee oversight. One of the worries then is that trustees either know nothing about AI and completely panic, or alternatively, they get very excited about it and think it's going to do everything. So there's something there about the knowledge throughout organizations and up to leadership. Still questions around data safety and transparency. We don't really know what's happening to our data with AI. I can tell you, knowing the people who are involved, it's probably nothing good. But the most important thing is that people know not to put personally identifiable information in there. Um, and then the other thing I think is across organizations, it's super important that people are using it to do more and to do things better, not to do less and be more lazy. And again, that's the thing about work slop, that sometimes what's happening is that people are just using it to just do things without really thinking about them. And if you don't put your real intelligence into artificial intelligence, it really is artificial. Yeah. So there are all these things to think about in terms of making sure that that's done well. Now, if we wanted to look at the kind of intermediate things that you can do, well, in terms of your back office day-to-day work, one of the things that you could start to do is look at creating your own mini chat GPTs. So you can create your own little bot within ChatGPT. You can just go in there, have a poke around, and you'll see that there are already quite a few little bots of their own that will do specialist things. So as I say, for example, there's one I use called UK Law, which basically has lots of legal information put into it by someone, and then it will actually allow you to pull out answers to questions on legal information and so on. What you can actually do is create your own version of that. So you could put in some of your own documents about your organization, for example, and use that to help you generate bids. So that's a way that you could kick it up a notch. And you'd be able to do that if you actually paid for users to actually use ChatGPT. I don't think you can do it in the free version, but again, that's one little notch that you can kick it up. And what you can do then is create shared accounts. So you could share documents across your team and share prompts and so on. And you can share libraries of boilerplate material that you want to use. So again, moving from just individual use to something that's more used across your organization. Once you get to the intermediate stage, you get into the stuff that I find quite exciting, although worrying in some ways as well. There are things like accessibility tools, for example, things like Be My Eyes or Be My AI, where plugins for websites will actually describe what's on the website to people. People might have their own browser plugin that does that anyway, but this stuff is all using AI anyway. A lot of people are moving towards producing chatbots for signposting with their services or for FAQs. Again, this doesn't need to be something very, very complex. Some of these things are actually basic plugins that you can stick into your website. And it's a case of actually just talking to your web designer and seeing what's out there and saying, well, are there some of these things that we can actually plug in fairly easily? Um, so a lot of these things are mostly sort of simple plugins. They're not major rebuilds of anything that you're doing and so on. A lot of this stuff is becoming much easier to access because as time goes on, the barriers to entry are getting lower, and also people are being very creative in terms of making it possible for people to do things themselves. For example, my partner works in AI and works in programming. And in fact, more and more, there are platforms that you can use just to write programs where you just actually tell the AI to write the program for you and it will do it. So again, what's happening is more and more people are trying to make it possible for you to use AI itself to actually create the AI tools. That's a bit further down the line in terms of advanced. The other thing is you might want to look at specialist tools. So, for example, there are a lot of databases now which make a big deal about using AI and so on. There were, for example, when Alexander and I first started talking about AI, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. Is it that long, Alexander? It might be even more. Yeah, but we were doing some, I was doing some training on fundraising, and there were all these fundraiser platforms starting to say that what they would do is allow you to write bids with AI. Aren't they amazing? And they were charging £20,000 to set them up and £8,000 a year in fees. And I was sort of saying, guys, you could use ChatGPT to do this with not much more effort. And of course, now everybody's using ChatGPT to do these things. So one of the things is that in general, things that appear to be specialist features in proprietary software are often just becoming quite standard in your off-the-shelf chatbots and so on. So don't rush into anything and spend huge amounts of money when actually it could be that a year later or even less, actually, it's quite easy just to do with off-the-shelf tools. Advanced. So once you get to advanced stuff, you might need this guy. Um, there are some really exciting things happening in the sector, in some of the bigger organizations around some of that not quite client facing stuff, but things that actually help you with your work with clients. So I'm really excited about what Citizens Advice is doing with a thing called Caddy. And that's a co-pilot that people use when their advisors are talking to people, rather than having to go to. I mean, I remember when I went to CAB in my 20s or something, and basically they had to go and find massive files of stuff and get them down and go through to find all this information. But actually, what's getting to this stage now is where actually there's loads of information in there in their system, but they can use that to actually, they can use a system to interrogate it through AI to give them the right information so they can share that with clients. And of course, you're keeping the human connection there, which is so important. And also, you've got a human checking it. But at the same time, that potential to manage information in that way is massive. So, really exciting. And then another thing that they're using, for example, at Shelter is to triage. They're doing at Shelter is triaging clients on their helpline. So you've got people who have some basic training, but what they're doing is actually using the AI to actually help them triage clients and see how quickly they can help them and how quickly they need things. And you will be seeing this already probably with GPs and so on as well. I think it's going to be happening more and more. Now, if you go beyond those exciting things, of course, there are very creative research projects that are happening, particularly around the specific things that particular charities do. So there was a very exciting project recently where people in a wildlife charity were using AI and data crunching, machine learning to look at the flight paths of bats, and using it to think about how to increase biodiversity in certain areas. And that's, of course, where this sort of creativity comes in. Can you think of something in your organization where maybe you could find a technical partner and say, we really want to do something with, you know, uh, cats who need opticians? I don't know. And you might find actually that there are things that you could do that are actually very specific to the work you do. So use your creativity and find out what the possibilities are. Another one, of course, is people using it for research and using it to analyze health outcomes and so on. And of course, there are loads of different research charities out there and policy charities and so on. So they'll be using it for very specific research purposes, some of which will be specialist, and they might want to get particular partners to work with. So with those things, they do need expertise. If you're not tech savvy yourselves, then you will probably need technical partners. And of course, it needs some realism about cost, but I think that goes both ways. Sometimes people assume that these things are going to cost millions, partly because Cisco systems will come along and tell you it will cost that. But actually, a lot of this thing can be kind of put together by smart people who are interested. So it might be a case of finding some local people or some students and so on who are really interested in these projects and saying, can we work together on doing something really creative and interesting? The other thing to say is that some of these tools are open source. Now, I don't know if everyone knows what open source means, but it means that people create these tools and they're actually free to access and use. You might need expertise to use them, usually you do, but actually people can build their own versions of those tools. They can build things to plug into those tools and so on. So it makes it a much more open thing and an open system. So you wouldn't have to pay to use the stuff that's underneath Caddy, for example. If you had the developer, you would be able to actually use those tools yourself, so you wouldn't be starting from nothing. So this is really exciting, and this is when that sense of sort of democratization of technology gets involved, I think, which is really exciting, that people are actually really sharing things for a good cause. Lots of exciting stuff going on there. Okay, so I wanted just to talk through what three levels might look like. And one of the areas that I know really well is fundraising. So I thought I would just talk through what could be the three sort of little steps that someone might take. Some of them are big steps. So the first one is, as I said, you could just move to creating your own GPT. So if you go into ChatGPT, you'll find if you've got the paid version, you can actually create your own here. Click create. And what you can do is just have a conversation with it and tell it that you want to actually build a GPT that will do something for you. So, for example, hi, I'll help you build a new GPT. You can say something like, make a creative who helps generate visuals for new products. God only knows what that will look like, folks. But let's say you do something that's a little bit more like, I want to write fundraising bids for this charity. And then what you could do is actually add down here various different documents. So you could add your annual report, and you could add some other bids that you'd written in the past and so on. And so then what you've got is a load of material that you can actually use and retrieve in order to create new materials, as well as you've created a sort of persona, or this bot, this GPT, who has a particular task and starts to learn and understand what it should be doing. So once you've created that, then you'll have a little icon down the side and you'll be able to use your own bot. And so for example, with the law center client I've got, I have a little GPT that I've created where it's used to legal talk and it's used to the kind of work that the organization does and so on. So I've got my own little domain there where I can work, and ChatGPT already knows the things it needs to do. So that's quite an interesting little thing that you could use just to kick it up a notch. Again, if you pay for the paid version, and also if you've got multiple users, you would be able to share that between your users as well. So that could be a really interesting way to go to the next step. Now, this is not a recommendation for any particular platform, but this is just for my sins. Instagram now is selling me every possible AI tool for charities. So one of the ones that came up recently was this one. And so what this is doing is helping you find donors. It's doing that by segmenting the data that's online and looking for the particular types of people who support your particular type of cause. I don't think it's analyzing and finding individuals, it's just finding particular cohorts and particular audiences and so on. And then what it will do is help you generate materials, probably really awful materials that you can share online that are really boring and no one will want to engage with, but we'll leave that to one side. And then what you can do is actually share those with the right audiences and so on, and see if it actually increases your individual giving, right? So again, you can get yourself a system. This actually, I mean, again, I don't know if it's any good. It's 30 quid a month. We're not talking about a huge amount of money really in the scheme of things. So there's a free trial, I think, and so on. So this could be something where actually you say, well, we're going to take on this new tool, we're going to learn how to use it, try it out and see how it goes. Yeah, so there's something you can buy off the shelf. It's a little bit beyond and a little bit more full featured than just using ChatGPT to do your own stuff, but it's not going to break the bank, and it's not going to be something that is super complex. Now, what you could do is do what Indiana State University has done in the UK, the US, and thanks to a colleague, Dan, who showed me this recently, where they've built Meet Samantha, Indiana State's virtual engagement officer. Now, seriously, I mean, I looked at this thing and it made my blood curdle. And I mean, it's sort of convincing, but in that sort of not quite convincing way. Um, but they said that apparently they raised $47,000 in 4 months, 527 gifts, 4,000 from lapsed donors, all this kind of stuff. Um, it says that there's a fundraising labor shortage. I'm not sure if that's really the case. I think they're just looking to save money on it. But yeah, I mean, and the question here is, well, obviously, I think they've used an existing platform to actually build the persona and how it actually works. So they're not starting from scratch. I would imagine it probably cost them quite a bit to actually create it. The next question is, did you really want this? I've got this horrible vision of poor lonely old ladies saying there was this really lovely young lady who talked to me from a university, and I gave her all my pension because she was so nice and she talks to me all the time, you know. And I just kind of have this worry that sometimes we're doing things because we can, but are we doing them for the right reasons? But again, not to make judgments, it might be a valuable thing to do, and maybe it's just an easier version of a chatbot, as long as people know they're talking to an AI. So if I'm thinking about those levels, and there's all sorts of levels in between, right? I'm thinking if you're doing the basic thing, maybe you're using ChatGPT or Claude to write bid drafts. So then the question to ask yourself at that stage is, are we checking it and are we doing it well? So I've given you some ideas about how to look at that, right? If you're doing the intermediate stuff, maybe you're looking at doing donor engagement tools through social media, as we just saw with that Pravi AI or something. Well, is it worth it? Is it going to have the return that you want on the small investment? Is it worth a try? Do we have the resources to implement it? Have we got people who are confident enough to use a new system, which doesn't look that complex, but it's not nothing? You know, do we have the resources to implement that? And then in the advanced section, if you wanted a virtual donor manager, the question, of course, is can we afford it? And really, do we really want it? Again, that's an open question. I think I would be worried about that, but I also know that sometimes I start off feeling uncomfortable about things, and then we all feel much better about them a year later, you know. So, questions to ask yourself: what's it worth doing? What's the impact? And do we feel comfortable with it? Oops. So, what's next? The most important thing I think at this stage is given that people are starting to adopt AI, and it would be unusual if an organization wasn't using it somewhere, unless it's just you. You know, if you've got staff in there, probably they're using it to some extent. I think the thing is, do you know who's using what? Are you giving them some at least light training? Um, for example, one of the things that I would say in terms of things like policy as well is something I find really important is getting across to people that you are responsible, you personally are responsible for what AI produces, right? So, in the same way that if you use Microsoft Excel and you produce a spreadsheet and all the numbers are wrong, okay, you know, it's a tool, but I am expecting you to be responsible for the numbers it produces. You're just using a tool. So one of the things is making sure that you're clear with staff that yes, if you're going to use this, I want to make sure that you're using it properly. And I want to make sure that you're actually taking responsibility for what it produces. It's no good people just saying, well, AI did it, it's not my fault. I think if you're going to use the tool, you've got to use it properly, right? So you need a simple policy, but also just an ethos, I think, that you get across to people. And in that, you might want to think about building shared practice. So having a conversation every now and then about how we're using AI. If there's anything that people have learned, for example, one of the things that is particularly useful with the sort of the things like ChatGPT and so on is using it very iteratively. And what often happens, for example, is that people try it once, get nowhere with it, and say, "Oh, actually, that's it. It's rubbish. I'm not going to use it." But if you've got other people around who are doing something with it, they can help people understand how actually, if you coax it and treat it more like a sort of a semi-intelligent colleague, of course, we've all got semi-intelligent colleagues as well who aren't computers, but you know what I mean. Then actually, you can get more out of it. So is there a sort of shared practice, and are people talking about their use, not just going away and doing things and not really thinking about it? And then the most important thing I think still is keeping that accuracy and also being really careful with data. Um, what I would say in general is, you know, I just find this stuff interesting. And if you do too, just be curious and experiment. Obviously, be safe about it, but the risks in general, as long as you're not sharing, huge amounts of data and so on, aren't that high. Just try it and treat it like a toy at first to learn how to use it, and then be creative and see what you can actually get going, right? Um, the other thing to say is that AI will actually answer your questions. So if you say, I have no idea what this tool does, then try asking AI, right? It's very, very good at training and teaching. I've had it teaching me quantum mechanics recently, so it will tell you some really interesting things. And if you want to know more about how you might implement it and so on, it's pretty good at that stuff. Of course, you don't want to just rely on AI for that. And one of the things is, can you ask around or find peers who have tried things? Are there conversations that you could have? If you see someone reporting on something that they've done recently, mentioned it on LinkedIn or something, could you have a coffee with them just to say, I'm really interested in seeing what you've done with this? What are the drawbacks? What are the pitfalls? What are the challenges and opportunities and so on? And then also, once you've realized what's possible there, that's when you can start thinking about partnering with people or funding those bigger creative ideas. If you've got a great idea, you could go to a funder. And some of the funders might even be able to actually point you towards a potential partner. Although funders are just trying to work out where to go with this at the moment as well. But one thing's for sure, they're going to be using AI to assess bids very soon. Some of them, I think, already probably are. So the take home is that you're probably already using AI. And in fact, you're definitely using it because it's now being baked into so many of the things that we're just using day to day. In fact, if you're using social media, you're using AI, really, right? So, it's in everything. The real question is, how well are we using it in our work and for what purpose? So I would say stay curious. Um, don't buy into the hype, but also recognize that it could be something that could do some really interesting and creative things for your organization, or just make some really boring, uh, time intensive tasks a bit quicker and slightly less boring. And then if you are interested in it, there's a lot more room for creativity. So do explore. I think that's it.
Uh,
Alexander.
Brilliant. I mean, thank you so much. That is a lot of thinking for a Friday morning, and like all really smart thinking, at least for me, has brought simplicity to a pretty complex topic. I particularly find that framework incredibly helpful.
I was worried I brought complexity to a complex topic, but
No,
okay.
no, no. I'm aware of time. We will send this video out on Monday, and as I mentioned at the start, we're wrestling with what to do at Bloom around AI and how we can support charities. So very keen on any, if you want to submit any jukebox requests to us to how we can help, whether it's in training or providing particular skills, then please let us know. We will see what we can do. Our November webinar is on corporate fundraising with Rachel Holborough. You'll get a link to that in the follow-up email, and I hope to see you there. And in the meantime, thank you for coming, and particular thanks to Alex. And I hope we can all avoid an AI work slop Friday, which is a new one to me. Thank you very much for coming,
I,
and see
I've got one planned, mate. That's my
Okay,
whole Friday.
okay, very good.
Nice to meet you all, guys. Bye.